Imagine this. It's December 1947. One of the greatest logicians in human history is sitting in a courtroom in New Jersey, taking his American citizenship test. His two witnesses are Albert Einstein and the economist Oscar Morgenstern. Everything is going smoothly until the judge casually mentions how Austria went from being a republic to a dictatorship. Gödel, the man who revolutionized mathematics with his incompleteness theorems, looks at the judge and says calmly, "It was a republic, but the constitution was such that it finally was changed into a dictatorship." The judge, surprised, replies, "Ooh, this is very bad. This could not happen in this country." Gödel answers without hesitation, "Oh yes, I can prove it." Einstein and Morgenstern were horrified. They knew Gödel's intense personality could ruin the entire naturalization process. The judge quickly shut down the conversation with the words, "Oh God, let's not go into this." And Gödel became an American citizen anyway. But what was the proof that Gödel had found? He never published it publicly, but the story became legendary. He had discovered a logical flaw in the United States Constitution, a flaw so dangerous that it could, in theory, allow the country to transform into a dictatorship through perfectly legal means. Welcome to part 1 of episode 1 in the series Gödel's Loophole: How Democracies Legally Die. Today we begin with the most famous case of all, the hidden vulnerability inside the Constitution of the United States. Kurt Gödel was born in Austria in 1906. By the time he was 30, he had already produced work that shook the foundations of mathematics forever. His incompleteness theorems proved that in any sufficiently powerful formal system, there are true statements that cannot be proved within the system itself, and the system cannot prove its own consistency. Gödel lived through the collapse of Austrian democracy. He saw firsthand how legal and parliamentary mechanisms could be used to dismantle a republic and replace it with authoritarian rule. Traumatized by the rise of totalitarianism in Europe, he fled to the United States and joined the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, where he became close friends with Albert Einstein. The two would take long walks together, discussing deep ideas for hours. In late 1947, Gödel prepared meticulously for his naturalization hearing. True to his nature as a rigorous logician, he didn't just memorize facts about American history. He studied the United States Constitution as if it were a formal axiomatic system, searching for internal contradictions or logical vulnerabilities. He believed he had found a possibility that the carefully designed system of checks and balances could be undone through its own legal procedures. Gödel saw the Constitution not as sacred, untouchable text, but as a set of rules that could, under certain conditions, rewrite themselves in dangerous ways. His friends tried to dissuade him from bringing it up during the hearing. They knew his intensity could jeopardize everything. Yet when the judge mentioned the collapse of Austrian democracy, Gödel couldn't resist. He began to explain the fatal design flaw he had discovered. The judge wisely changed the subject before Gödel could go too far. His anecdote, preserved mainly through Oscar Morgenstern's diary, has fascinated constitutional scholars, logicians, and historians ever since. It raises a profound and unsettling question. Can a democracy contain within itself the seeds of its own legal destruction? In this first part, we have set the stage. The dramatic story of Gödel's citizenship test, his background as a brilliant and traumatized logician, and his deep study of the American Constitution as a formal system. In part 2, we will dive into the specific logical flaw Gödel identified, the self-referential nature of Article 5, the Amendment Clause, and begin to understand why he believed it could be used to undermine the entire system of checks and balances. But already one question lingers in the air. If even the United States Constitution, designed with such care, contains a hidden logical vulnerability, how safe is any democracy from being legally transformed from within? So what exactly was the logical flaw that Kurt Gödel discovered in the United States Constitution? The most widely accepted answer points to Article V, the single article that governs how the Constitution can be amended. Here is the relevant part of Article 5. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which, in either case, shall be valid to all intents and purposes, as part of this Constitution, when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states. At first glance, this seems like a strong safeguard. It sets a very high bar, 2/3 of both houses of Congress to propose an amendment, and 3/4 of the states to ratify it. But here is where the danger lies. Notice what Article V does not say. It does not protect itself from being amended. It does not contain any clause that says certain parts of the Constitution can never be changed. It does not prevent future amendments from altering the amendment process itself. This creates a self-referential feature. Exactly the kind of logical structure that would fascinate a mind like Gödel's. The rules for changing the Constitution can be used to change the rules for changing the Constitution. Legal scholar Effie Pujal, in his influential paper on Gödel's loophole, argues that this is the core vulnerability. A supermajority could, in theory, use the current difficult process to pass an amendment that weakens Article V itself, for example, by lowering the threshold for future amendments from 3/4 of the states to a simple majority. Here's where it gets really interesting. Once Article V is weakened, the second step becomes much easier. With a lower bar for constitutional changes, a determined majority could then pass a series of new amendments that eliminate the independence of the judiciary, allow the president to rule by decree with the force of law, remove term limits, or regular elections concentrate legislative, executive, and judicial power into a single branch or personnel. And this could be done without ever violating the Constitution that was in force at each moment. It would be a perfectly legal, step-based downward spiral toward authoritarian rule, a constitutional self-coup. This is pure Gödelian logic. Just as his incompleteness theorems showed that formal systems can contain statements about themselves that create paradoxes or limitations, the Constitution contains a rule about its own rules that can be turned against the entire system. Pay close attention to this paradox. The mechanism that was designed to protect the Republic, the difficult amendment process, contains no unbreakable barrier against being relaxed or even dismantled. It is like a security system whose own code can be rewritten using the security system itself. In this second part, we have examined the specific logical flaw, the self-referential nature of Article V, and the two-step process that could legally transform the United States into a dictatorship while remaining fully constitutional at every stage. In Part 3, we will look at what actually happened during Gödel's citizenship hearing, why the loophole has never been exploited in American history so far, what it means for the United States in 2026, and the deeper lesson this case teaches us about constitutional design and democratic vulnerability. But already one unsettling realization stands out. Even the oldest written national constitution in the world, carefully crafted with checks and balances, contains within it the logical possibility of its own undoing. So how did this story actually end? And what does Gödel's loophole mean for us today? Gödel never publicly revealed the exact details of the flaw he had found. He mentioned it only in private conversations with Einstein and Morgenstern. Official transcript of the citizenship hearing records the full discussion. The judge wisely changed the subject before Gödel could elaborate further, and Gödel became an American citizen. Historically, the loophole has never been exploited to create a dictatorship in the United States. The high thresholds in Article 5, combined with America's deep cultural commitment to Republican norms, federalism, and judicial review, have made any radical downward amendment extremely difficult in practice. Yet the theoretical possibility remains. As of 2026, the United States still operates under its original constitutional framework with only 27 amendments. None have followed the dangerous path that Gödel feared. However, in an era of increasing polarization, institutional distrust, and growing talk of constitutional hardball, scholars continue to debate whether the loophole could ever become more than just a thought experiment. The real value of Gödel's discovery is not in predicting imminent doom, but in forcing us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Even the most carefully designed constitution is a formal system, and every formal system contains the possibility of self-reference and self-erosion. The lesson from Gödel's loophole is both humbling and urgent. No constitution is a perfect, closed, and self-protecting machine. Safeguards like difficult amendment processes and checks and balances are valuable, but they are not magically immune to being turned inward. Democracies ultimately rely not only on written rules, but on strong political norms, civic culture, and the willingness of citizens and leaders to defend the spirit as well as the letter of the law. Kurt Gödel, scarred by the collapse of democracy in Europe, treated the American Constitution with the same rigorous scrutiny he applied to mathematical systems. His warning reminds us that the greatest threats to democracy often come not from those who openly break the rules, but from those who master them so completely that they can legally rewrite them. What do you think? Could Gödel's loophole ever be used in modern America, or do informal guardrails and political culture make it impossible? Which part of this story surprised you the most? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Your opinions help shape future episodes. If you found this episode thought-provoking, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the rest of the series. Next time, in part 2 of this series, we will travel to Weimar, Germany and examine Article 48, the emergency clause that legally handed absolute power to Adolf Hitler. Until then, keep thinking critically about the systems we live under. The rules matter, but so does our willingness to understand their hidden weaknesses. Thanks for watching.